All right, so today we're diving deep into Master Your Mind. This ebook is all about unlocking your mental potential. We've got all your notes and excerpts right here, ready to go.
Sounds good.
And just to be clear, the ebook does mention it's meant to be like a guide, not like the ultimate truth or anything,
Right.
but, there's still bound to be some interesting stuff in there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is how it starts off, connecting our thoughts to our actual experiences.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost like those spiritual teachings you hear about, like your thoughts shape your reality.
Yeah. It reminds me of The Secret and all those manifestation books, but this one seems to go a bit deeper.
Yeah.
It's suggesting we got to ditch all those like pre-programmed thought patterns, the ones we've just picked up over the years.
Yeah, right. It's arguing that real mental mastery is about like becoming aware of those patterns, the ones from society, family, even advertising, and then like consciously choosing what we want to believe instead of just running on autopilot.
So it's not just about like thinking positive thoughts. It's
No.
about questioning where those thoughts are even coming from.
Exactly. And that's where they bring in meditation. It's not just about relaxation.
Right.
They're arguing that meditation helps you actually observe your thoughts without like getting carried away by them.
Okay, so instead of like getting swept up in the I'm not good enough thought loop, you're just kind of watching it from a distance.
Exactly. You're
Yeah.
seeing it objectively, and that can help you break free from its grip. And the ebook suggests that when we start to really understand the power of our thoughts,
Yeah.
we can actually use them to shape our experiences instead of feeling like life's just happening to us.
That's a powerful idea. But the ebook doesn't shy away from the negative side of things either.
Right.
It talks about how if a lot of people's minds are full of negativity, that spills out into society, creates
Yeah.
all sorts of problems.
Yeah, you see this in everything from
Mhm.
conflicts and wars
Mm.
to the way we treat the environment. It's like a reflection of millions of minds that aren't in a good place.
Yeah.
And they specifically point to the influence of things like social media, centralized media, advertising.
That makes sense. I mean, we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us what to buy, what to think, even how to feel.
Right.
It's no wonder so many people feel lost or anxious.
Right. It's like our minds are being programmed without us even realizing it.
Yeah.
But the ebook doesn't just point fingers. It goes on to share some pretty mind-blowing scientific insights into how our minds actually work.
Like that whole thing about our minds not being able to tell the difference between what's real and what we imagine.
Yeah. They use the example of imagining eating your favorite food,
Oh, yeah.
even though you're not actually eating it. Your body still reacts as if you are. Your stomach might grumble, you might salivate, all because of a thought.
So if my mind can trick my body into thinking I'm eating, what else can it do?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
And the ebook dives even deeper, explaining how a huge chunk of our mental activity, something like 95%, is happening in our subconscious.
That's crazy. So what we're consciously thinking about is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. The ebook compares the subconscious to like a giant computer that's constantly storing and processing information. In fact, they say we're bombarded with 2 million bits of data every single second.
No wonder I feel overwhelmed sometimes. But how does our mind even handle all that?
Well, the subconscious filters out most of it, thank goodness.
Oh, okay.
But the ebook makes a really interesting point. If our subconscious is like running the show,
Right.
and it's been programmed by all these external influences, how do we make sure it's working for us, not against us?
So it's not enough to just change our conscious thoughts. We have to reprogram that giant subconscious computer.
Exactly. And the ebook suggests that's where things like affirmations and self-hypnosis come in.
Yeah.
But it's not about some, quick fix or overnight manifestation. They're pretty upfront about that.
Yeah. I can imagine that undoing years of negative programming takes some serious effort.
Absolutely. It's a process. But the ebook lays out some practical steps for building that mental strength. They start with exercise, not just for the physical benefits,
Right.
but because it helps you build willpower and discipline.
So pushing through a tough workout is like training your mind to stick with something, even when it's challenging.
That's the idea. And then they talk about diet, specifically how our environment influences our food choices. They suggest experimenting with cutting out things like caffeine, sugar, and processed foods to see how it impacts your mental clarity and energy levels.
I've heard that those kinds of foods can really mess with your focus and mood.
Right, and they tie this into the concept of minimalism, simplifying your environment to create like a calmer, more focused mental space.
So if my desk is covered in clutter, that might reflect a cluttered mind. Time for a cleanup, I guess.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
And along with those, foundational habits,
Yeah.
the ebook goes into a bunch of mind-sharpening practices.
Mm.
There's meditation, yoga, fasting, mindfulness, concentration,
Wow.
even pursuing your passions with intensity.
Wow. That's a lot. Where do you even start?
The ebook suggests picking one practice and committing to it for at least a month. They say you'll be surprised by the results. But they also mention, like, a more intense option,
Okay.
an 11-day silent retreat
Wow.
with meditation, yoga, a vegan diet, and a complete tech detox.
That sounds like a serious mental reset.
Right.
But I guess if you really want to dive deep into mastering your mind, sometimes you need to go all in.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to the idea of the subconscious as like a computer program.
Hmm.
If we want to change our experiences, we need to change the programming.
So how do we actually reprogram our subconscious? The ebook mentions affirmations, but I've always been a bit skeptical about those.
Yeah, they address that skepticism, explaining that it's not just about repeating any old phrase. The language matters. They suggest using present tense affirmations, like I am confident or I am abundant, and repeating them consistently, especially during times when your mind is more receptive, like in the morning, at night, or during meditation.
So it's about consistently feeding your subconscious with those positive messages.
Exactly. But they also acknowledge that sometimes affirmations alone aren't enough,
Yeah.
especially if you're dealing with deep-seated beliefs.
So that's where those other practices, the exercise, the diet, the meditation,
Right.
they help lay the groundwork for those affirmations to really take root.
Right. And they even offer, like, a fun tip. Try turning your affirmations into a rhyming poem. They say it helps them stick in your subconscious, kind of like a catchy song you can't get out of your head.
I like that. It's like sneaking those positive messages in through the back door.
Exactly. Along with affirmations, they briefly mention other techniques, like binaural beats and theta waves,
Oh, yeah.
which are supposed to help you reach those relaxed brainwave states,
Yeah.
where your subconscious is more open to suggestion.
It's interesting how there are so many different approaches to working with the subconscious, but it sounds like the key is finding what resonates with you and consistently applying it.
Absolutely. But here's a crucial point the ebook makes. You can't be affirming abundance while simultaneously drowning in a sea of negativity and advertising. You have to protect your mental space.
So it's not enough to just focus on the positive. You have to actively filter out the negative.
Exactly. It's like you're creating a mental sanctuary, a space where those positive affirmations can really flourish. And that leads us to a fascinating debate the ebook touches on: the law of attraction versus shadow work.
Okay, I've heard of both of those,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not sure I fully understand the difference.
The law of attraction is all about attracting positivity into your life, focusing on what you want and believing it will come to you. Shadow work, on the other hand, is about confronting the darker, repressed aspects of yourself,
Okay.
those fears and insecurities that might be holding you back.
So it's like one is about looking outward and attracting good things, while the other is about looking inward and facing your demons.
Exactly. And the ebook uses the example of people pleasers to illustrate this.
People pleasers, those folks who always put everyone else's needs before their own.
Right. And they often struggle to set boundaries and say no. The ebook suggests that from a shadow work perspective, this behavior might stem from deep-seated fears of rejection or abandonment.
So instead of just trying to attract more love and acceptance, they need to address those underlying fears.
Exactly. It's about healing those wounds and building a sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on external validation.
That's a really interesting perspective, but does the ebook say which approach is better? Law of attraction or shadow work?
Interestingly, they don't take sides. They encourage the listener to consider both perspectives and think critically about what resonates with them.
So maybe it's not about choosing one or the other, but rather about integrating both approaches.
Exactly. Perhaps doing some positivity work helps us to unearth those shadows. And facing our shadows ultimately leads to greater positivity.
Like two sides of the same coin, both necessary for creating a whole and balanced sense of self.
Exactly. And speaking of creating, the ebook dives into the power of creativity and imagination, suggesting that it's often overlooked but essential for mental mastery.
I've always thought of creativity as something artistic, like painting or writing, but they're saying it's more than that.
Much more. They argue that imagination is the driving force behind, like, most human achievements. Think of inventors, entrepreneurs, even scientists. They all had to imagine something before they could create it.
So creativity isn't just about making art. It's about bringing new things into the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they quote Einstein saying, logic will get you from A to B, imagination will get you anywhere. They even connect imagination to meditation, suggesting that both practices can help you access those altered states of consciousness
Hmm.
where breakthroughs and insights happen.
I never thought about it that way, but it makes sense. When you're in that like creative flow state, you often lose track of time and come up with ideas you never would have thought of otherwise.
Right. And they challenge the listener to really flex those creative muscles.
Yeah.
They suggest things like painting 100 pictures in a month, writing 1,000 words a day, or spending 10 minutes a day visualizing your ideal scenario.
Wow, those are some pretty ambitious challenges. But I guess that's the point, to push yourself beyond your perceived limitations.
Exactly. And speaking of pushing limits, the ebook doesn't shy away from tackling the topic of wealth manifestation.
I was wondering when they get to that. So, what's their take? Is it all about thinking positive thoughts and magically attracting money?
It's more nuanced than that. They
Okay.
start by reminding us that our brains can't distinguish between what's real and what we imagine.
Okay.
So they suggest using this to our advantage by playing some mind games to shift our money mindset.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of mind games?
One trick is to carry a lot of cash and be generous with tips. It's not just about having the money.
Right.
It's about getting used to the feeling of abundance.
I can see how that could shift your perspective. Instead of feeling like you're constantly lacking, you're embodying that energy of wealth.
Exactly. And they say you might even notice that other people treat you differently when you project that kind of confidence and abundance.
Interesting. What's another one of their tricks?
They suggest spending time with wealthy people, not just to network,
Right.
but because their energy and beliefs can be contagious.
So it's like osmosis, but for mindsets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They call it mindset osmosis. And finally, they emphasize the importance of cultivating gratitude.
That's a pretty common theme in self-help books. But how does gratitude relate to wealth manifestation?
They point out that manifestation is great, but gratitude makes you happy now,
Yeah.
in the present moment. And the more grateful you are, the more the universe gives you to be grateful for.
So it's a positive feedback loop. The more you appreciate what you have, the more you attract abundance.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key concept the ebook explores: immersion.
Immersion. What do they mean by that?
They're talking about fully engaging in experiences that push you out of your comfort zone and accelerate your mental and emotional growth.
So it's not just about reading about these concepts, it's about actually applying them in real life.
Exactly. And they use examples like learning a challenging language like Mandarin, mastering a complex skill like coding, or even diving deep into a completely different culture.
It's interesting how they connect those seemingly disparate activities. What do they have in common?
They all require you to step outside of your familiar patterns
Yeah.
and embrace new ways of thinking and being. And they say that this kind of intense experience can lead to rapid personal growth and transformation.
I can see how that would be the case. When you're forced to adapt to new situations and challenges, your brain has to rewire itself in a way.
Exactly. And they even suggest trying something that's the complete opposite of what you're used to. Like if you're a tech addict, try a month of digital minimalism.
Wow, that's a radical idea. But I guess sometimes you need a complete shakeup to break free from those ingrained habits.
Exactly. And that brings us to a point where the ebook takes a step back and acknowledges that all of this is coming from a Western perspective,
Okay.
which might not be the only way to view the world.
So they're saying there are other ways to understand the mind and reality besides the ones we're used to.
Exactly. They quote the Stoic philosopher Seneca, who advised focusing on a few master thinkers instead of getting lost in information overload. And then they go on to introduce a whole range of alternative frameworks for understanding the world. Things like astrology, Ayurveda, Hinduism, Presentism, Stoicism, traditional Chinese medicine, Taoism, and Zen.
Wow, that's quite a list. What's the purpose of introducing all those different perspectives?
They're suggesting that each of these frameworks offers a unique lens through which to view yourself and the world.
So it's not about saying one is right and the others are wrong. It's about expanding our perspective and seeing things from different angles.
Exactly. And maybe in the process, we'll discover new ways of understanding the mind and its potential.
Okay, so we've been exploring all these different ways of looking at the mind, how our thoughts shape our reality, the power of the subconscious, and even the idea of mindset osmosis. But what about the specific practices, the ones the ebook talks about for actually mastering your mind?
Yeah.
They have a whole section on mind sharpening techniques.
Yeah, they start with one that's become pretty popular. in recent years anyway, meditation.
Right.
And they kind of present it as a foundational practice
Mm.
for calming the mind, increasing self-awareness, and building resilience.
Yeah.
It's not just about relaxation, though. It's about training your attention and developing a deeper understanding of your own thought patterns.
Yeah, I've tried meditation before, but I always struggle to quiet my mind. It feels like the more I try to not think, the more thoughts pop up.
Yeah, the ebook acknowledges that it takes practice. And they actually suggest two specific styles, Vipassana and Transcendental Meditation.
Mm.
They recommend aiming for 20 minutes twice a day. But they also mention the possibility of doing a longer retreat
Okay.
for a more immersive experience.
A retreat sounds intense, but I can see how removing distractions and focusing solely on meditation could be really transformative.
Absolutely. And along with meditation, they highlight yoga as another powerful practice for developing mental strength.
Mm.
And they emphasize that it's not just about the physical postures.
Right.
It's about the integration of breath, concentration, and movement.
So it's like a moving meditation.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
And they describe yoga as a way to subdue the mind
Mm.
by bringing it into a state of flow.
That makes sense. When I'm really focused on a yoga pose, I don't have the mental space to worry about other things.
Exactly. And then they bring up a practice that might seem a bit more extreme, fasting.
Mm.
They present it as a way to cultivate willpower and discipline, which are essential for mastering your mind.
Fasting. I've heard of it for health reasons, but I didn't realize it had mental benefits too.
Yeah, they point out that humans tend to perform best when they're slightly hungry. It sharpens the mind. Plus, there's research showing that fasting can increase longevity, at least in rats. But they also emphasize that it's not for everyone and should be approached with caution.
Yeah, it sounds like something you'd want to consult with a doctor about before trying. But it's interesting to consider how pushing your physical limits can translate to mental strength.
Absolutely. And along with these more structured practices,
Right.
the ebook emphasizes the importance of mindfulness, which is about bringing awareness to everyday moments throughout the day.
So instead of just meditating for 20 minutes in the morning, you're trying to be more present in everything you do.
Exactly. They suggest things like taking a minute every hour to focus on your breath, or simply paying attention to your senses as you go about your day. It's about training your mind to stay in the present moment instead of getting caught up in thoughts about the past or future.
That sounds like a good way to break out of those negative thought loops that can really drag you down.
Right. And then they talk about another key skill, concentration.
Okay.
They suggest focusing your attention on a single point, like a candle flame,
Yeah.
for a few minutes each day.
So it's like weightlifting for your attention span.
Exactly. And they mentioned that research suggests the maximum amount of time a human can intensely focus on something is about 10 minutes. So it's not about pushing yourself to extremes. It's about gradually building that mental muscle.
I can see how that would be incredibly helpful in our world of constant distractions.
Right?
If you can train your mind to focus, you're much more likely to achieve your goals.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then they move on to something that might sound a bit more fun, pursuing your passions with intensity. They argue that when you're fully engaged in something you love,
Yeah.
you naturally block out distractions and reach a state of flow.
So it's not just about discipline and willpower. It's also about finding activities that light you up
Yeah.
and make you lose track of time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they even suggest taking this a step further by doing an 11-day silent retreat where you combine meditation, yoga, a healthy diet, and a digital detox.
Oh, wow.
It's like an immersive training program for your mind.
That sounds incredible, but also pretty daunting. I can only imagine the clarity and insights you could gain from that kind of experience.
Right. It would be like hitting the reset button on your mind
Yeah.
and coming back refreshed and re-energized.
Okay, so we've talked about all these practices for strengthening and sharpening the mind. But what about the subconscious? We talked earlier about how it's like a giant computer program that needs to be reprogrammed. How do they suggest we do that?
Well, they go into more detail about affirmations, emphasizing the importance of using present tense language
Yeah.
and repeating them consistently.
So instead of saying, I want to be confident, you'd say, I am confident.
Exactly. And they suggest incorporating affirmations into your meditation practice, writing them down, or even turning them into rhyming poems to make them more memorable.
That's a cool idea. It's like embedding those positive messages into your subconscious through creative expression.
Right. And they also acknowledge that sometimes affirmations alone aren't enough,
Yeah.
especially if you're dealing with, like, deeply ingrained negative beliefs.
Right.
That's where those other practices, we talked about the exercise, the diet, the meditations come in. They create a more fertile ground for those affirmations to take root.
So it's like you're creating a whole ecosystem for positive change, not just relying on one technique.
Exactly. But they also point out that our subconscious is constantly being bombarded with input from our environment, the media, advertising,
Right. It's like our minds are under constant assault.
in a way,
Yeah.
yeah. And they emphasize the importance of becoming aware of this input and consciously choosing what we allow into our mental space.
Mm.
It's about protecting your inner world
Mm.
from negativity and distractions.
So it's not just about adding positive input, it's also about filtering out the negative.
Exactly. And they mention other techniques for working with the subconscious,
Yeah.
like binaural beats and theta waves,
Right.
which are supposed to help you reach those relaxed brainwave states where you're more open to suggestion.
So it's like finding the right tools and techniques to hack into your own subconscious.
In a way, yes. But they also emphasize that it's not about controlling your subconscious. It's about understanding it and working with it.
That makes sense. It's like a partnership, not a dictatorship.
Exactly. And speaking of different perspectives, the ebook delves into the debate between the law of attraction and shadow work.
Right. We touched on that earlier. One is about attracting positivity. The other is about confronting your inner darkness. What more do they say about it?
Well, they use the example of people pleasers
Yeah.
to illustrate how these two approaches might play out. People pleasers often struggle to set boundaries and say no,
Mhm.
which can lead to resentment and burnout.
I can see how that would be the case. It's like you're constantly giving away your energy without replenishing it.
Exactly.
Mm.
And the ebook suggests that from a shadow work perspective, this behavior might stem from a fear of rejection or a belief that you're only worthy of love if you're constantly pleasing others.
So instead of just trying to attract more love and acceptance, you need to address those underlying fears and beliefs.
Right. It's about building a sense of self-worth. That doesn't depend on external validation.
But doesn't the law of attraction also emphasize self-love
Mm.
and believing in your own worthiness?
It does, but the approach is different. The law of attraction might focus on affirming your worthiness and attracting positive relationships into your life. Shadow work, on the other hand, would encourage you to explore the roots of those insecurities and heal those wounds.
So it's like one is about building yourself up from the outside in, while the other is about working from the inside out.
That's a good way to put it. And the ebook doesn't necessarily say one approach is better than the other. They encourage the reader to consider both perspectives. Yeah. And see what resonates with them.
Maybe it's not about choosing sides, but rather about integrating both approaches. Maybe doing some positivity work helps you uncover those shadows, and facing your shadows ultimately leads to greater positivity.
Exactly. It's like those two approaches are complementary, working together to create a more whole and balanced sense of self.
And speaking of wholeness, the ebook also emphasizes the power of creativity and imagination. They argue that it's not just about making art, it's about tapping into a deeper source of wisdom and insight.
Right? They say that imagination is the driving force behind most human achievement.
Mm.
They give examples like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, visionaries who imagined entirely new possibilities and then made them a reality.
I've always admired people like that, who seem to be able to see things that others don't. It's like they're tapping into some hidden potential within themselves.
Exactly. And they quote Einstein saying, "Logic will get you from A to B. Imagination will get you anywhere." They suggest that imagination, like meditation, can help you access those altered states of consciousness where breakthroughs happen.
So it's not just about being logical and practical, it's also about allowing yourself to, like, dream
Yeah.
and imagine new possibilities.
Exactly. And they challenge the reader to really flex their creative muscles. They suggest things like painting 100 pictures in a month, writing 1,000 words a day, or spending 10 minutes a day visualizing your ideal scenario.
Those are some pretty bold challenges, but I can see how pushing yourself creatively could lead to all sorts of unexpected insights and breakthroughs.
Absolutely. And they connect this back to the subconscious, suggesting that engaging in creative activities can actually bring subconscious issues to the surface, helping you to understand and resolve them.
So it's like you're using creativity as a tool for self-discovery.
Exactly. And they also touch on the topic of wealth manifestation, reminding us that our brains can't distinguish between what's real and what we imagine. So they suggest using this to our advantage by playing some mind games to shift our money mindset.
We talked about this earlier, things like carrying lots of cash and spending time with wealthy people. What else do they suggest?
Well, they emphasize the importance of cultivating gratitude, not just as a way to attract more abundance, but also as a way to be happy in the present moment. They point out that the more grateful you are, the more you have to be grateful for.
It's like a positive feedback loop.
Yeah,
The more you appreciate what you have, the more abundance you attract.
exactly. And finally, they talk about immersion as a way to accelerate your personal growth. They're not just talking about reading about these concepts. They're talking about fully engaging in experiences that push you out of your comfort zone.
We talked about this before, things like learning a new language, mastering a complex skill, or immersing yourself in a different culture. But how does that tie back to mastering your mind?
They argue that these kinds of experiences force you to adapt and grow in ways that you wouldn't if you stayed within your comfort zone.
Mm.
They challenge your assumptions, expand your perspective, and ultimately help you develop a more flexible and resilient mind.
It's like you're putting your mental muscles to the test
Mhm.
and building them up through those challenging experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they even suggest trying something that's the complete opposite of what you're used to. Like if you're a tech addict, try a month of digital minimalism
That's a pretty radical idea, but I can see how it would shake things up.
and force you to reevaluate your relationship with technology.
Right. And finally, the ebook takes a step back and acknowledges that all of this is coming from like a Western perspective,
Okay.
which might not be the only way to view the world. They quote the Stoic philosopher Seneca, who advised focusing on a few master thinkers instead of getting lost in information overload.
Hmm.
And then they go on to introduce a range of alternative frameworks for understanding the world. Things like astrology, Ayurveda, Hinduism, Presentism, Stoicism, traditional Chinese medicine, Taoism, and Zen.
Wow, that's quite a list. What's the purpose of introducing all these different perspectives?
They're suggesting that each of these frameworks offers a unique lens through which to view yourself and the world. So it's not about saying one is right and the others are wrong. It's about expanding our perspective and seeing things from different angles.
Exactly. And maybe in the process, we'll discover new ways of thinking and being
Mm-hmm.
that we never would have considered before.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground already, but there's still more to explore.
Right.
The ebook wraps up by introducing all these different frameworks for understanding the world, like astrology, Ayurveda, Hinduism, even Stoicism. It's like a crash course in global wisdom.
Right. And they're not saying you have to become like an expert in all of these, but rather encouraging you to be open to different perspectives.
Yeah, it's like instead of just looking at the world through one lens, you're trying on a bunch of different glasses to see how they change your vision.
Exactly. So let's dive into a few of these frameworks, starting with astrology. What do you make of that one?
Honestly, I'm not sure I fully understand it. Some people seem to take it really seriously,
Right.
while others just dismiss it as, like, total nonsense.
Yeah. The ebook actually emphasizes the Indian Vedic tradition of astrology,
Yeah.
but it acknowledges that it exists in various forms across many cultures. The core idea is that the positions of celestial bodies at the time of your birth
Right.
influence your personality, tendencies, and even your life path.
So it's not so much about predicting specific events as it is about understanding your, like, inherent nature.
Right. They frame it more as a tool for self-awareness and introspection. It can help you identify your strengths, weaknesses, and potential challenges.
Interesting. Maybe I should give it a closer look. Now, what about Ayurveda? That's another one I've heard of, but don't really know much about.
Ayurveda is often considered the sister science of astrology, and it also originated in India.
Hmm.
It's a holistic system of health and well-being focused on balancing the three fundamental energies, or doshas:
Mm.
Vata, Pitta, and Kapha.
Doshas. That sounds kind of mystical.
It's not as complicated as it sounds. Basically, everyone has a unique combination of these doshas, and understanding your dominant dosha can provide insights into your physical and mental health.
So it's like a personalized blueprint for well-being.
Exactly. Ayurveda offers recommendations for diet, exercise, lifestyle choices,
Hmm.
and even spiritual practices tailored to your individual constitution.
That makes a lot of sense. I like the idea of a more personalized approach to health
Yeah.
rather than a one-size-fits-all solution.
Absolutely. No. The ebook also touches on Hinduism,
Okay.
which I found interesting.
Hinduism. How does that tie into mastering your mind?
Well, they highlight the fact that Hinduism is incredibly diverse and offers a wide range of paths to spiritual growth, unlike some religions with, like, strict doctrines.
Right.
Hinduism embraces a multitude of deities and practices.
So it's more about finding what resonates with you personally.
Exactly. The ebook suggests that this flexibility and openness make Hinduism a fertile ground for self-discovery and spiritual exploration.
Okay, now we're getting into some pretty heady territory. Let's move on to something a bit more practical. What's this presentism all about?
Presentism is a philosophical concept that argues that only the present moment truly exists. The past is gone, the future is uncertain.
Right.
All we really have is now.
I can see how that connects to mindfulness and being fully present.
Absolutely. The ebook contrasts presentism with eternalism,
Yeah.
which posits that all moments in time are equally real. It's a fascinating philosophical debate.
Okay. Maybe we should stick to the more practical stuff for now. What about Stoicism? I've heard that mentioned a lot lately.
Stoicism is a philosophy that emphasizes virtue, reason, and living in accordance with nature. It was developed in ancient Greece
Okay.
and has seen a resurgence in popularity in recent years.
What are some of the key principles of Stoicism?
Well, Stoicism teaches self-control, acceptance of what we cannot change, and focusing on what is within our power, our thoughts, actions, and reactions. It's about cultivating inner strength and resilience in the face of life's challenges.
So it's about not letting external circumstances dictate your inner peace.
Exactly. Now let's move on to traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM.
Okay.
I've always been curious about acupuncture.
Yeah.
But what else does TCM encompass?
Yeah, good question.
TCM takes a holistic approach to health, viewing the body as an interconnected system of energy. It emphasizes the balance of yin and yang and seeks to address the root causes of illness rather than just treating symptoms.
So it's about restoring harmony and balance within the body.
Exactly.
Yep.
And TCM utilizes a wide range of techniques, including acupuncture, herbal medicine, massage, and dietary therapy.
Okay. And alongside TCM, the ebook mentions Taoism,
Right.
which I admit I know very little about.
Taoism is a philosophical and spiritual tradition that emphasizes living in harmony with the Tao, the underlying principle of the universe. It's about embracing simplicity, going with the flow, and letting go of the need to control everything.
Sounds pretty chill.
It is. And finally, we come to Zen, which is a school of Mahayana Buddhism.
Zen. I associate that with meditation and mindfulness.
You're on the right track. Zen emphasizes direct experience, intuition, and meditation as paths to enlightenment. It's less about dogma and more about experiential understanding.
So it's something you have to experience for yourself to truly grasp.
Exactly. The ebook suggests that Zen defies easy explanation. It's about cultivating a deep awareness of the present moment.
Wow. What an incredible journey through all these different frameworks. It's amazing how many ways there are to approach the question of what it means to master your mind.
Right. And the key takeaway for the listener is this. Don't limit yourself to just one perspective. Explore, experiment, and see what resonates with you.
It's like we've been given a whole toolkit of ideas and practices to play with.
Exactly. And the ebook leaves us with one final thought-provoking question. It doesn't really delve into the ethical considerations of some of these mind mastery techniques or the potential downsides.
That's a good point. It's like we've been exploring the power of the mind. But with great power comes great responsibility, right?
So as you continue on your journey of mental mastery, it's worth reflecting on these questions. What are the boundaries? What are the potential risks? And how can we use these tools wisely and ethically?
Food for thought, for sure. Well, this has been an amazing deep dive into Master Your Mind. We've covered so much ground, from the depths of the subconscious to the heights of spiritual philosophy.
And it's clear that there's no one right way to master your mind. It's a journey of self-discovery, exploration, and continuous growth.
Absolutely. So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to take what you've learned and create your own path to mental mastery.
Remember, it's not about achieving some final destination.
Right.
It's about the ongoing process of understanding and shaping your own mind.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Master Your Mind. Until next time,
Yeah.
keep exploring, keep learning, and keep mastering your own incredible mind.